Hello, kids. Welcome to today's episode about aliens.
Yay!
I don't know where that came from, but we're going to go with it. Welcome back to Modern Day Apocrypha, everybody. Clearly, tonight is a little bit more of a ridiculous episode. So, Nick, tell us about it.
Yeah, for anybody that doesn't know, we're talking about aliens, as Tony talked about, and these are the ones from outer space that we're talking about. Like,
hypothetically.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, by definition, then, like, what would be an alien that's of this world?
Well, there's a theory that aliens are not necessarily just outer spatial, like outer galaxy, but that they're multidimensional. And so that they could be from this world, but just from a higher dimension, and that's why we don't see them as often. So, hypothetically.
What a brilliant answer, because I immediately started thinking, like, what's below the surface of the ocean? And, you know, I think there's actually been some theories, I guess you might say, about octopi or octopuses.
Yeah.
Being from, like, alien life, and their DNA doesn't match up with the rest of the animal kingdom. I don't know how true that is, but that's where my mind immediately went. But you're talking about just right off the bat, next fucking level.
Bro, you know this is where my mind lives. And you asked. I was going to ease our way into it, but you asked a question and I couldn't just bullshit you.
Why don't we say that for just a second and we'll dive into that space, because I want to just kind of talk about what is grounded when it comes to aliens, so that we have just like a point of reference that we can all, I think, agree on. Maybe not agree. I don't want to assume that for everybody, but I think, like, just kind of running through some of these numbers and, like, the logic here.
And this is why this podcast works, everybody, because from the get-go, I'm like, hey, let's go out here. And Nick's like, hold up, let's reel Tony back in.
But no, I think, like, it's a fascinating thought, because I think we all have the same ideas when we think about, like, different dimensions. And it's like, well, what do those dimensions consist of? What's in it? We've heard the simulation theory before. For anybody that doesn't know, it's basically a theory that this whole world is a simulation akin to, you know, The Sims. And we're all just Sims running around with pre-programmed actions. But then that, like, just begs to be questioned who designed the simulation, or who's in these other dimensions.
The aliens are playing us as we play our computer Sims.
That's right. I think in The Sims you can even have a computer with Sims on it.
Do you ever watch The Office and watch that episode where Dwight, I can't remember what the name of the game was, but inside of the game, he's playing himself playing the game?
I've seen every episode of The Office, but I have a terrible lifetime issue where I don't remember what I've watched.
Okay, well, just trust that happened.
Okay.
It was there. For all our Office fans, you know what I'm talking about.
I'm glad you all enjoyed that.
Well, now that you brought me back down to Earth, where do we want to have this extraterrestrial conversation? Where should we start?
I think Beyond Earth would be a good start. Didn't mean to bring you all the way back.
It's all good.
So, where is a good place to start? Let's talk about the Fermi paradox. Let's back up even from there. I think a question that everybody asks is, one, do aliens exist? And of course, the answer is unknown right now.
Oh, it's yes.
But it better be. Those assholes, where are you hiding? But the second question that almost always follows that up is, why haven't we seen any? And so that brings us to something called the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox is this idea that all life goes through a set of obstacles, if you will. The first might be life itself. We'll call that a filter 1. The second obstacle might be developing beyond asexuality, so like sexual reproduction, because that's where you get like much more stable, robust evolution, and, you know, it all kind of stems from that. And then, you know, maybe a third one, these are all arbitrary, but maybe a third one is human-like intelligence. But at some point, life encounters what's called the Great Filter, which in our minds would be like an asteroid wipes out all of life, or we blow each other up with nuclear war, or the sun turns into a red giant and engulfs all of its
Shit got dark
planets
quick,
and
man.
shit. And so that's the great filter.
Okay.
And so the idea is that before life has a chance to get to like an intergalactic empire, it has to go through the great filter, and life doesn't make it through that, whatever that great filter may be.
So how can it go beyond if it doesn't make it through the filter?
So that's the idea, is that life hasn't ever gotten to that point.
Okay, got it.
We're not intergalactic. We're not even
Galactic.
interstellar or intersolar. I mean, hell, I guess technically we've sent one space probe outside of the solar system, maybe two now. And they're just on a fucking beeline mission, just heading out to Never Never Land. And so, yeah, it's like, okay, well, if that's true, maybe there is something that tends to happen to life that could be an answer. And so all life, or every instance of life in our observable universe, can't be detected because it's all on like a planetary level.
Okay.
Just kind of interesting. It's an answer to why we might not be seeing life.
That makes sense.
But we do know that there are a lot of contenders that have some of the criteria that came to my mind anyway about what we needed for life. So those are like, you need an energy source or food. For plants, that could be photosynthesis. They're creating, I believe, photosynthesis creates sugars that the plants can feed off of.
Yeah.
You've got to have like some metabolic medium. So today that's water. Like that's why all life as we know it needs water. And there's, a whole slew of reasons that water is the medium that life goes through, for biological reasons, chemical reasons, the way that it bonds to sugars and allows cells to pull in the nutrients from sugars into their cell walls and use it for energy. So that's a whole conversation in and of itself. And then life seems to need like an atmosphere or some level of protection. And so those are the things that like we look for when we're looking for aliens or extraterrestrial life. Or do you have an atmosphere, or maybe it's like a surface, like rocky surface that shields you from the sun's radiation and all of that? Can you get energy? Is there enough warmth for you to survive? Because if you hit absolute zero, which is 0 degrees Kelvin, then all metabolic processes stop. Like basically chemistry just stops. Life just freezes. Or not life, like matter freezes. And so that's absolute zero. So if you take those criteria and just kind of look throughout the solar system, I think that there are different examples where you can find all of, or 2 out of 3 of those criteria are checked. And
So there's like potential planets where there could be other things that haven't bridged the gap of getting off the planet in a big way, like we still kind of haven't. Am I following along?
Yeah, so I think I'm getting a little bit past that now. So what I mean by that is there could be life that's trapped on a planet, or maybe it's even interplanetary or interstellar, but just not in our observable universe.
Okay.
Like the universe is just like damn near infinitely large. And so it could be on a whole nother side of the universe that we've never even detected light from yet. Like light waves have yet to hit us. And so we, in theory, would never be able to know unless you could travel faster than light, because we're moving away from them faster than light. That's a whole nother thing about like the universe expanding. But like if you look inward at the solar system, I just noted 5 examples that I thought were the most prominent places to look for life. And this is what, most scientists and astronomers would look for. Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, it ejects plumes of water like geysers out into space. And I think
Damn.
it's been quite some time since I read about Europa, but I think it will shoot them like 120 miles off the surface. And so like you can see them in telescopes.
Can you imagine that being like a water slide?
Yeah, like you get launched and then you're all the way back
Come
down.
back down into the atmosphere. Totally not sustainable, but it sounds like a hell of a ride.
Sustainable if you got the balls for it. Fuck that. And then, so obviously, like when you talk about other planets, besides Mercury and Venus, they all seem really cold.
Yeah.
And it's the same case with Enceladus. Like I think it's got a surface of ice, if I recall correctly, but that's not really a problem because Jupiter has so much gravity that as the moon orbits Jupiter or rotates, the gravity causes matter inside the core to be pulled, and that causes friction and that generates heat. And so you have basically gravity induced heat.
That's wild, man.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So that's the planet where the mermaids are.
That's where the mermaids are, yes. That's right. And maybe, in fact, Ursula came down, Ursula from The Little Mermaid,
Yeah.
came down from Enceladus, and that's where we get all of our octopuses.
I was just going to go there. Perfect.
Fucking makes sense.
So the mermaids died off,
I think this episode's done.
and that's how we got octopi. Perfect. Guys, we figured it out. Coast closed? Case closed. There it is.
Coast closed, everyone.
Coast closed. No. Case closed. Done.
On to episode whatever's next. Yeah, so that one's kind of fascinating because they've got liquid H2O, the geysers coming up, all underneath the surface. So you've got not an atmosphere per se, but it's that rocky surface that would protect you from radiation. And then you've got heat. And so like if you think about I don't know if you've heard about the microbes that live on geothermal vents at the bottom of our ocean.
Those are cool.
Yeah, they get no sunlight. They don't need sunlight because they get energy from the geothermal vents. Basically just hot liquids that come out. Think of it like kind of like a volcano, but a little bit different.
Yeah, they're non-photosynthetic corals and stuff that filter the particles and stuff.
So I assume that you learned about that when you were doing like aquarium stuff?
Yeah, man. You know me. I love the ocean stuff. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, I spent several years working in a professional aquarium. So,
which is badass.
Yeah.
Side note, I took a trip down to Chattanooga with this guy. And Chattanooga has a pretty nice aquarium. And that was the best aquarium trip that I've been on because you're like calling the fish out by names and explaining their behaviors. And I was like, fuck, dude, I don't even need a guide or anything. Like, why waste my time listening to the guy who's in the scuba gear in the tank? I got Tony with me.
Yeah, that's a flame angel fish. And that right there is a 𝗟𝗄𝗽 and
Hell
yada,
yeah,
yada. Yep.
Love it.
Side note, anyone who wants to take me to an aquarium, just buy my ticket and I will tell you all about all the fish.
Holla.
Private guide.
All that's asked is the ticket.
Well, you know, maybe transportation and maybe post-Rona.
Meh. Who needs it? So we talked about Europa.
Yep.
I'll run through the rest of these a little bit quicker than I did Europa. But Titan is a moon on Saturn. It's got liquid rivers and lakes and oceans, which is pretty fucking fascinating. But it's not water. It's methane and ethane, which are interesting because they're carbon-based and all life is carbon-based. So it's like, yeah, it doesn't have the water, which we already said is a criteria. But if you remember, I specifically said metabolic medium.
Now, you said all life is carbon-based. Is that true, or is it just all life that we're aware of? Is it possible that there's a different system of life and, I don't know, maybe consciousness, if we go that far, that's based on a different structure or skin suit housing system?
Yeah, I think the answer would be yes, that it's possible, but I don't know. I'm not a chemist by any means.
Yeah,
but
me either.
I've seen studies that say that like over half of all molecules involve carbon.
Okay.
So just right off the bat, it's like easily the most prominent way for atoms to bond with each other.
Cool. That makes sense.
Not that it always has to have carbon.
Right.
but that's what we see. And I believe I'm right in saying that all life is carbon-based that we know today.
Cool.
But going down the same question, does all life need water for metabolic purposes? Like we talked about, this is why I kind of framed up why water was the medium that we need, because it's able to dissolve different substances that our bodies can use, that cells can use.
It's an easy medium. If we're like 60, 70% water, cool. There's a system to get everything I need everywhere in and throughout. That makes sense.
Bingo. And your cells the cell walls are permeable by water. So when water comes in, because the sugars have dissolved, we're able to take whatever nutrients are in the sugars, not just like a grain of sugar that would be otherwise if it couldn't be dissolved. And so that's what allows those nutrients to pass into your cells. Your cells can transport them to the parts of your body that need it. And that's why water.
That's why water.
That's why water. So, but I think that it's plausible that perhaps methane, for example, could be a source that could be suffice for that.
Cool.
Enceladus, another moon of Saturn, has a water-based ocean underneath its surface. And they've detected chemical energy in some of the geysers that have been ejected out, just kind of like we talked about with Enceladus. And the Cassini probe, which was sent out to orbit Saturn, orbited Enceladus as well. Excuse me, I referenced Enceladus while talking about Enceladus. I meant Europa, the first one that we talked about. Sorry.
Enceladus. That sounds like, if I ever have kids, that's the name of my firstborn son.
Yeah, that's a pretty badass name, first of all.
Anyways, probe.
So the probe went through it and found like chemical compounds that could be a potential food source for life. That would be subsurface. And then Mars, I think everybody's familiar with Mars, but it used to be a lot like Earth, where you've got like liquid water, oceans and rivers and all that shit. So it's one theory for aliens is that we're aliens and we originated on Mars. Is plausible.
Have you read any of that stuff where basically they've talked about how there was some type of a weapon that was used, and the text or the book that I had read on it described it as like a sword that pierced through the planet. And if you look on it, there's like this big old fucking crater on one side, and exactly on the opposite side, there's all this other shit that's bubbled up. So whether it was an actual sword or if it was some version of like a big ass nuke, and it just fucked the planet that hard, and that's why
holy shit,
it killed the ecosystem and the biome, and whatever happened after that.
Are you sure that wasn't Darth, Mr. Vader?
I don't think so.
Where's the fucking Death Star when you need him?
No shit. No, but the planet wouldn't be there if it was the Death Star.
Yeah, it was just like a Death Star version 1.
Okay, yeah. Oh, guys, we fucked up. We didn't blow up the whole planet. We just ruined it.
But we removed a fucking column from the middle, bitches.
Anyways, yeah, I've heard some crazy shit about Mars.
So, yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard that. But I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Something that comes to my mind is tardigrades. Have you heard of tardigrades?
No.
Or water bears? They're the same thing. They're very common. Like, if you pick up moss or algae, it'll usually have tardigrades in it. But they're these little bitty microscopic organisms. I don't know what else to call them. I think they're arthropods. And could be wrong on that. But anyway, microscopic organisms. But they are like the most durable species of any fucking species that we know of. And to the point where they can do ridiculous things. Like, we talked about absolute zero earlier. Scientists have never been able to actually create like true absolute zero, but they've gotten like really damn close to so cold that molecules stop moving.
Yeah.
And these tardigrades come all the way down to that temperature. And then if you just raise them back up to the normal temperature, pour some water on them, they just fucking like pop up like nothing happened.
So is that how, I mean, taking us on a little bit of a tangent here, in the movies, when they put people into like a cryo sleep, is that it? Like, you just put people into absolute zero for a couple hundred years, they wake up on the other side of the galaxy and they're like, ugh. Okay, cool. Here I am.
I think it's a little bit different.
Okay.
I think, but maybe it's kind of like the same concept, but a little bit different, I think. So the concept, it would work. Like you can think of that as tardigrades. But I think with cryochambers, they're like, I think you actually experience some like tissue damage unless they're able to dehydrate you because water expands. And so in theory, like all of your cells would burst.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think they're banking on the idea that we'll have technology later on down the road that can restore that.
That makes sense.
I may be way off.
Can you imagine, like, all right, bye, everybody. See you in 100 years. I'm just going to shrivel up and then rehydrate me when you're ready for me to come back. You know how, like, nasty that would look? Like, everyone would turn into a mummy.
Yes.
And what if we could just take these mummies and, like, you know, put a little bit of Miracle Grow on them and they wake back up? We've gotten way off topic.
Need more Miracle Grow.
Tardigrades.
But yeah, so these tardigrades can survive like massive amounts of heat, radiation. Like you can nuclear bomb them, and as long as they don't get like shredded by like the G forces, then they'll survive. Like no fucking problem. They can survive in space. And so like if you think about this animal that we know exists,
shit,
and it was on Mars, and it gets blasted out by a sword going through Mars's ass, and it's flying through space on a rock, and it's been dormant for like 30 years. And then it lands on Earth, and it's like, there's some water here. Boop.
So how you've described that, the mentality that I picture for every single one of these beings is Crush from Finding Nemo. Just like super chill, like,
surf's up, bro.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. Oh, we're going through this crazy it'll be okay. Nuclear bomb. I'm launched into space off my home planet. I'll just, chill out over here.
Yeah, it's no big deal.
That's wild, dude. I didn't even know that those things existed or that they were so resilient.
And so like when you think about an animal like that, one, how long has it been on Earth? And how many opportunities has that had to be exploded off of Earth and fly through the fucking atmosphere and through space?
Yeah.
It's like, knowing that something like that exists, period, is enough evidence for me to be like, it's probably out there somewhere.
Right.
Like, that's fucking wild, dude.
Well, and I think it's kind of arrogant, but that's pretty human, to think that we're the most intelligent life out there.
Yeah, I think so. It's like we're the most intelligent that we've discovered, but jury's still out on whales and orcas and maybe other animals that I'm not aware of.
Yep. Well, and if you think about it, someone with the wrong allergies, like a fucking bee can kill you. So just because we can dominate a whale or an octopus or whatever doesn't mean that our intelligence is higher.
Yeah. And I think we attribute a lot of intelligence to the way that we're able to manipulate the world.
Yeah.
But that goes beyond just the brain, and that's into like our physical appendages. Mm-hmm. Like a dolphin can't do that. They can slap you on the ass, and that's about it. Hey, good job there.
Right.
A few years ago, they did discover like really saline liquid water on the surface of Mars.
Ooh.
I don't know if you saw that, but they had some like drainage that got heated up in the equator on Mars, which can hit around like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's 21 degrees Celsius. And yeah, so there's like still some liquid water on there. It's probably too salty for anything to live in, but
still cool.
Maybe not. And then Venus, I think. Did you hear about like the recent discovery of, I think it was called phosphine? That's not true. Some chemical I don't know much about. May have been phosphine, but it was detected in the atmosphere. And as far as we know, that's only been produced by life forms.
Oh, shit. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's pretty fascinating. But I think they revised that a little bit and said not as much was detected as they had originally thought. But still kind of begs the question, like, could there be some shit going on Venus?
Right. Which would be dope as hell.
Hell yeah.
Send me to Venus, bro.
So we've talked about like what it takes for life to be sustainable, where we're looking in our solar system, and then the last thing that I put down were just some numbers so that like we could talk about the grand scale. And I think that like gives us framework to structure the rest of the conversation off of. The fun shit. So just 3 points that I wanted to make about the numbers. The sun is one of over 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, in our galaxy.
It's a lot of stars.
The Milky Way is one of 100 to 200 billion galaxies that are estimated. Fuck. So you've got 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and then 100 to 200 billion more galaxies, each with, let's call it 150 billion stars on average. And then every star that we know of so far has on average one or more planets.
That are sustainable for life.
Just one or more planets.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you have to factor in the moons, because 3 out of the 5 examples that I just pointed at in our solar system were moons.
Yeah.
And so just think about those numbers. That's like a 1 with 18 plus another 9, 27. That's like a 1 with like 36 zeros, which you can't even fathom. And those are the number of like instances where life could possibly form.
That's wild, man. Yeah, there's life out there.
When you just look at the numbers,
Just looking at the numbers, there has to be.
it would be wild if we're the only life form.
Yeah.
And then you also factor in like what 14 billion years, the length that the universe has been around. Like that's a fuck ton of time for stuff to happen.
No shit, dude. No shit. And to think like, oh yeah, humanity, we're at the top of the food chain.
This is it, boys.
Fuck that.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
That's nonsense.
Tell me about dimensions.
We ready for that now? I don't know, man. So I guess one theory why we don't see aliens, right, or extraterrestrials, if there is beings out there that have gone through such an evolutionary advancement that have learned to elevate their consciousness between dimensions, something that would take like a long, long time, right? Hypothetically. Maybe they just got started before us, or maybe, like you said, they seeded us as they left Mars and then went wherever, or who knows, right? I'm just going to have to re-explain it. I was trying to think if I've done this explanation on the podcast before, but so if you think about two-dimensional, I don't have paper on here, so I'll just use my hands. If you think of us looking down a dimension at a two-dimensional reality, right? So I'll use your hat here. The table is this plane, right? And we've got your hat and we've got my cup, and they're friends, right?
They are friends.
It's technically your cup, but this is you, this is me. And we're here in this like two-dimensional space. And then one day someone comes along and picks me up. You have no idea
Picks your cup up.
Right.
For anybody that's listening, we've got a hat on the table. The table's obviously flat.
Yes.
And so that represents your two dimensions. The hat is a beanie that's effectively flat. And so it's also two-dimensional.
Yep.
And the hat and the cup that Tony's talking about, if you think about them in like a cross-section, they're both two-dimensional.
Correct. So it's just, we're all in the same plane, right?
Yeah. There's no up or down.
Correct. And so when I lift this up, from your perspective, up doesn't exist. I just disappear. And then, you know, I float back down, I get let go, and I land back, and you're like, where the fuck did you go? Because it's easy to talk about dimensions going down, because in our 3 dimensions we can see and understand 2, but it's hard to comprehend and explain 4 or 5 or 6. So what if there's these beings that live in a 4 or 5th or 6th dimensional reality, and they can sit and observe us, and they could be sitting here in this room right now, but because they're choosing to not sit in our cross section of dimension of our reality that we have access to, they could be completely invisible to us.
And it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
If there are other dimensions, which I think is on the table for discussion.
Well, and as we start to learn more about like quantum shit, that's all fourth dimensional reality. And so there we go. Like, it makes sense. It's logical. We just haven't gotten to the point where we can prove and understand it yet.
Right. And so, like, just to give another visual example of what Tony's talking about, imagine you've got a piece of paper with a pencil and you're writing. Let's say you're writing a word, the. You write a T, you write an H, and from the T and the H's perspective, they're friends. They see each other. They know that they're there. But then once you write the E, the pencil lands and it's like, oh, there's our friend E, or the little pencil point, the mark that the pencil makes on the paper.
Yeah.
There's our friend, the little dot. And then that pencil gets picked back up and it's like the dot's just fucking gone. It's like the pencil got lifted up, no more dot.
Yep.
That was actually a worse example than I thought going into it, but we're forging ahead.
Well, you look at some of these like UFO sightings and stuff, and sure, of course, some of them are faked because people want attention, but I think a lot of them are real. And well, how do they just disappear? Well, again, I think it goes back into multidimensionality, that they know how to shift in and out of dimensions in a way that we don't understand or are not yet aware or capable of yet.
Yeah, and so it'd be like, let's bring this to 3D cubes because I want to dive deeper into that.
Let's do it.
So imagine you've got a cube, and we don't live on the surfaces of the cube. We live in and of the cube. Like, just imagine yourself at the middle of the cube.
Okay.
And you've got all these different directions. You can go up, down, left, right, forward, backwards. Those are each of our 3 dimensions. And then all of a sudden, you're talking about, like, is it fair to say a UFO?
Sure.
So let's use a UFO as an example.
Yeah.
A UFO pops up randomly, like it appears out of thin air, or what?
So if you're taking this 3D cube, the next step up, have you ever looked at what a tesseract looks like?
I've heard this word. I don't know where, though.
So
is this how they tried to graphically do 4 dimensions?
Basically.
Okay, yeah. It's a cube inside of a cube, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. And so imagine from every corner of your cube, there's another line that goes out to kind of a bigger cube. And that's not a perfect description of it, but it's enough for our discussion. And so we live within this initial inner cube. And let's say the UFO knows how to go in and out of that, but they can be all around our cube in this other extra space. And so then when they want to, they can decide to go into our cube of reality that we can perceive and are aware of. And that's why we're like, oh, fuck, where'd you come from? How'd you get here? And then when we get hostile and they're like, oh, fuck this noise, boop, all they have to do is just pop right out. And so we're like, oh, it's cloaking. They just learned how to be invisible and mirror the shit behind them. And that's possible, but to me, it's more plausible that they just shift dimensions.
Have there been any... I'm trying to think of an example of like a UFO sighting or a extraterrestrial sighting, I guess is the word to use, where things just vanished out of thin air. Because the ones that I'm familiar with are like... there are quite a few examples, but like Commander Fravor, who was flying, I think he was a naval pilot off the coast of San Diego, and he was flying a mission, and he saw a craft fucking essentially like teleport from one spot to another, and that could be in the same vein.
Yep. I think that goes to, I could be wrong here, but I think that goes to understanding quantum mechanics and how to bend time and space. And our current understanding is that time and space we don't know how to bend it. It's just very linear. To get from point A to point B, you have to travel along that line, and you can move around it, but you're still traveling on a line to get from point A to point B. Whereas it would seem like when we have some of these sightings where the craft goes instantaneously from A to B, it's like they bend it and whoop, here I am.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, if they can bend it that way, excuse me, the plausibility of them being able to shift dimensions is highly likely as well.
Because it's like if you think about space as a flat plane, it would have to be bent into another dimension. Like
Right.
it would have to be bent somewhere. When paper is folded upon itself, both sides are going up to meet. And it's like, where is that up? That's that extra dimension.
Yep. Definitely. Well, there's other stuff too, like Bob Lazar. You familiar with him?
Yeah. An element like 115.
Element 115 and the site that was next to Area 51, I think called S2, and how he just got some contract because his story growing up, I think there's a really cool documentary about him on Netflix. So definitely worth checking out. But he was always just really good at propulsion. And like, even as a kid, his mom was freaking out because he was making all these like crazy fast cars. And
Yeah, he attached a rocket to a normal vehicle. I think it was in like Oklahoma.
yeah,
And that got him, I think that's how he ended up getting this job.
getting the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were like, hey, we want you to come work on this stuff. And they were pretty vague about it. But he ended up going in and, you know, allegedly worked on extraterrestrial craft, trying to reverse engineer it. And, you know, he talks about everything being very compartmentalized, and you only worked on your stuff and you wrote your briefs and it went up and you never saw anything again.
Meaning, like, if let's say it's like a traditional UFO, like a saucer with a little bulb in the middle where a dude sits.
Yeah.
Very stereotypical, but like he would be responsible for just the propulsion part of it. How did it move?
Yep.
And then somebody else who didn't really talk to Bob would be responsible for like, what's this material made out of?
Yep. And then someone else would be focused on, let's say, the navigation systems or how that stuff worked. And like that way, if they did have a leak, it wasn't a full picture and it was so much easier to cover up, push under the rug, make someone seem crazy.
Which is how most military and like classified operations function. You're compartmentalized.
Yep. And so he talked about this element 115 that I think he was back and forth on it. Like, one, we didn't know how to create it. It was something that we didn't have access to. And then also, I think he mentioned that there was a specific recipe or a specific way it could be created. And that, I don't know if he said or if he alleged that we had made deals with extraterrestrials to get more element 115. So we could, basically element 115, for anyone who doesn't know, is alleged to be the element that allows anti-gravity. Without it, they don't know. It's kind of like gas for propulsion for us.
Right. And the thing about the anti-gravity is one of the theories behind the Commander Fravor incident that we talked about is that they're able to use that gravity to manipulate space-time.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why they can move so fast and not have to like arc and turn like we do with...
Because they don't experience G-force.
Exactly. It's just instantaneous up, down, left, right, wherever they want to be.
Yeah.
Which is fucking cool.
Hell yeah, it is. And what I think is fascinating about this is the Bob Lazar story all unfolds in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And element 115, which is called moscovium, was discovered, we'll say quote unquote discovered, in 2003.
Yeah.
And so it's like Bob knew that it existed, which if you look at a periodic table of the elements, like you can see that there would be a gap there. And it's like, yeah, you know that there are these elements, or you can safely assume.
Yeah.
Because it's like we've discovered element 120, 122, 123. And so it's like, we just need to find 115. So there's that aspect of it, but he knew about this element, and it also, the way that he described it with anti-gravity before that was really a prominent thing to be considered, recognize, or that also ties into like the Commander Fravor story, and it matches up to propulsion system that Bob Lazar was talking about, potentially using anti-gravity to move, seems to be a plausible explanation for how the craft that Commander Fravor saw moved. And that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think all of this stuff is super cool. So his story is one that was super public, and he never planned on going public, but he felt threatened and felt followed and thought his life was in danger, and he thought the only way he could stay safe was to go public, because then if he went public and they killed him, all they did was prove him right in his eyes.
He did bring some friends out to
Yeah,
some of the hills.
that's why he got scared, because they found him, and he brought some friends out. Do you remember the specifics of that story?
He knew the schedule, because I
Yeah.
think they were taking this craft out and actually flying it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he brought some friends out to the hills, one of the hills in the area, and they watched it take off.
Yeah. And then somehow got caught, or somehow found out about it, and his contract was terminated, and then people were following him, and
Well, they started fucking with him, is what I heard. Like,
Yeah.
they called his wife and said, or maybe called him and told him that she was having an affair or something. But anyway, that gets into like more of like the personal story as opposed to the like evidence of
Right.
alien construction.
right.
And I think that's, I don't know. So like a lot of people will discredit Bob Lazar. Like he claims to have graduated from, oh man, I don't remember all the details.
That university, and then you go look and it's not there.
Yeah, he's been purged from the records or never attended, as
Yep.
the government would want you to believe. And at one of his previous jobs before this, he was working somewhere with propulsion systems, and they also claimed that he had never worked there, but some like old documents finally surfaced that actually had him on
The payroll.
the payroll.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so this motherfucker did work there. So why was the government trying to cover this up?
Well, yeah. Or why would the company say he didn't work there? And then now there's proof that he did. That just leans more to the narrative that goes, oh, maybe this is a sloppy cover up.
Yeah, I think so too. And like it gives his story credibility. It doesn't prove anything.
Of course.
But it gives it more credibility because it raises some eyebrows like, what the fuck was going on there?
It makes you want to dig more.
Yeah. All right, Bob, I'm listening.
Exactly. Next guy I want to talk about is Stephen Greer. Are you familiar with him?
No.
So, everyone got their own version of being bored in quarantine. Mine was, fuck it, let's look up UFOs. And I think for like a month or two solid, anything I could, I fell down the rabbit hole of let me look at anything with aliens and UFOs. And it wasn't too hard to run into Stephen Greer. If you're not familiar with him, go look him up. And you know, he's in that Bob Lazar camp of some people like discredit, some people believe. But he ran a thing called the Disclosure Project, which was working with the government to try to disclose a lot of what they have, the information they have about extraterrestrials and alleged recovered craft and this, that, and the other. Because he's like, hey, people have a right to know. And I can't remember how he got started or what type of encounter he had that was like, no, like this shit's real. We need to let people know. Like he's a doctor. Like he was a general surgeon and has completely shifted gears and is like, nope, my whole life is about proving extraterrestrial life. And so he's got this protocol thing for what he calls close encounters of the fifth kind, which is interesting. And let me just look up the list here because I thought this was interesting. There's all these different kinds of encounters. So close encounters of the first kind is just visual sightings. This is all in Wikipedia of an unidentified flying object less than 500 feet away. Close encounters of the second kind, event in which physical effect is alleged. So this can be interference in the functioning of a vehicle or an electronic device, animals reacting, paralysis or heat and discomfort, trace impressions in the ground, scorched or otherwise affected vegetation, so like crop circles, allegedly.
So it goes beyond a sighting, and there's some soft evidence.
Right. The third kind is with an animated entity as present, so it includes humanoids, robots, and humans who seem to be occupants or pilots of a UFO. Close encounters of the fourth kind is an event in which a human is abducted by a UFO or its occupants. If you ever see that movie, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind?
No, but that's why this sounds so familiar.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was fucking wild, dude. Movie freaked me out. Because it goes back and forth between, it's got the chick from Resident Evil as one of the main characters in it. And it shows, it like dramatized what happened, but then it keeps cutting back to like actual footage they had of shit when they were researching back in the day. Creepy as shit. Or at least it made it look like it was actual footage. I don't know if it was. I know they can fake that shit. But anyways, the fourth kind is basically when there's abduction. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind is direct communication between aliens and humans. This is what Stephen Greer kind of named as his experience through like conscious, voluntary, and proactive human-initiated cooperative communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. So if you're interested and you want to try to go talk to aliens, go look up Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Stephen Greer's got this like whole protocol of like how you interact with them, and it's all through consciousness.
Okay, pause right there.
Yeah, there's two more after that.
What the? Okay, keep going.
Okay, so the sixth kind is death of a human or animal associated with a UFO sighting. It said it could be considered a more severe example of a second kind encounter, or the seventh kind is creation of a human-alien hybrid, either by sexual reproduction or artificial scientific methods.
Interesting. Okay, so if we just walk that back, you said that Stephen Greer has experienced, or he claims to have experienced, an encounter of a fifth kind.
Yep. And he has a protocol to have anyone do it.
Can we just lay out his story for anybody interested? Is anybody else other than me interested in this?
Let me pull it up here. Let me see if I can find his...
While you're pulling that up, the Close Encounters of a Seventh Kind, which is where you have like an animal human, or excuse me, an alien human hybrid. There are some theories, which maybe we can come back to this topic, but there are some theories that claim that aliens had intentionally merged their DNA or whatever their not reproductive matter, but anyway, they've merged their DNA with some of the apes that were here on Earth.
Yeah.
And that's why there's such a stark contrast of intelligence and brain development and all of the things that make us human versus the bonobos and the chimpanzees, which are very closely related to us, but seem to be, eons behind us in terms of the way that they've evolved and their intelligence, and they can't articulate things as nearly as well or to the same degrees that we can.
I'm looking, man, and I'm not finding it.
Sounds like we've got some homework.
I know. But basically it's there. And so I remember my buddy, I don't know if he wants me to mention him or not on air, so I won't mention him by name.
All right, Richard.
Yeah, we'll call him Richard, and he's probably laughing right now because he probably knows who he is if he's listening. But he was telling me, he's like, yeah, I was trying this out. And so I couldn't sleep one night. It's like 2 a.m. And so I got up and I sat down at the foot of my bed and I was going through these protocols. And I don't know, he's just trying it out. And then he hears this like really loud snap or pop, like right next to his head. And his wife wakes up because she's still sleeping in the bed.
What?
And she's like, what are you doing? What was that? And he's like, nothing, coming back to bed. So he's like, okay, so apparently this shit works and I shouldn't fuck with it.
But it wasn't his snap, right?
No, like he was just sitting there and like something physically happened. Again, all anecdotal. But it was, maybe March or so when like we all got stuck at home and we had nothing better to do. And I was too nervous at the time to try to just like, because I believe all this shit's real. And I'm like, well, I don't want to just go, hello, universe, come hang out with Tony. Because I don't know if you have good intentions or not. Fuck that noise.
Yeah. Like, how do I know it's not going to be the sixth kind?
Exactly.
Shit.
Ugh.
So, from the outsider's perspective, not having read much about this, it immediately makes me think of like the Bloody Mary shit that we used to do as kids, where you go into a bathroom, you turn the lights off, and you spin around 3 times and say, Bloody Mary, come and get me a Bloody Mary, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you look in the mirror and you're supposed to see, you know, Bloody Mary. She shows up and ah!
Right.
And so that's the way that I think about this without having looked into it. So like I'm skeptical about having like snaps and sounds like that. It sounds very paranormal.
Sure.
But I'm fucking curious.
And so what if, this is taking us in a different tangent, what if a lot of this paranormal stuff that we experience is extraterrestrial beings?
Oh, well, fuck shit.
And we go into that higher dimensionality that they're in and out of, and we just classify it as something else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Potentially logical, but how do you prove it? You know, like, I mean, we've talked about this before.
Stick with us for another couple hundred years.
Right? We'll get it. But we've talked about this before. I lean more to I guess that kind of makes sense. And maybe I want that to make sense, so let's explore it. And you keep me grounded and are like, all right, how do we fucking prove this, Tony? How do we make this tangible?
Well, no, like I'm curious. I just don't know how to. It's hard to be It's hard for me to be convinced of something, even if I entertain the idea.
Sure.
It's just hard for me to feel like that's the
reality.
The reality, yeah.
And that makes sense. I think the way that I figure shit out personally is by almost believing that it's real to the point that I can explore it to its depths, and from that place of experience, get to know maybe this wasn't as real as I thought.
So it's like you want to replicate it yourself, and if you can, then it's like all in.
Yep. And if I can't, I maybe try a few more times, but
maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I can't replicate it, I might still entertain, but it goes in that box of like, I wasn't able to, but just because I wasn't able to doesn't mean it's not real, just because I didn't have that experience. But it gets set back a layer. Like, yeah, I don't know about that. I'll hear other people's experiences, but until I've had my own, I don't know. But then there's also like a placebo type effect, you know, just because I'm trying to create it, I might be faking my own experiences and stuff. And I try to be very careful and cautious of that, but I mean, that's just how I explore.
So we've talked a lot about like what are the criteria for like how we're looking for aliens. We talked about some of the more prominent stories in ufological culture, with Bob Lazar and Stephen Greer and Commander Fravor, excuse me. And, you know, I know that Commander Fravor's story was verified by the Pentagon. Like they released the actual document and you can see it. And I won't try to recount the experience because you can just look them up online and you'll find videos immediately. And the Pentagon was like, yeah, we don't know what the fuck that is. So it's clear that there are shenanigans going on around us. I think the question that I have is maybe threefold. One, are these instances extraterrestrial, or are they alien, or unknown in some capacity of like some being that we don't know of? That's one. Number two is, are they devices or experiences created by entities that we do know about, meaning like other humans? Maybe it's, you know, like another country or some United States government secret vehicle or weapon or something. And then third on the table is, what else could it be?
Right.
Like, could they be like scientific anomalies? Like think about like a mirage in the desert before we knew how light refracts and can bend. Like you see a mirage and it's like, no, I swear I saw a mirage.
And it looks like
I swear I saw water.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty damn convinced, and I'm open to be unconvinced, but I'm pretty convinced that there's, whether you want to call it extraterrestrials, angels, demons, whatever, I'm convinced that shit is really, really real and exists. You know, there's stuff on how, like, if you look back in history on how Egyptian culture didn't grow, it popped out of nowhere. The Sumerian culture just popped out of nowhere, like, and all out of nowhere we have written language. What the fuck? How does that happen? You know, you don't just wake up one day and have language developed. Someone taught it to you, you know? And so I believe that, and this is just my perspective, way wildly okay to be wrong. Like you mentioned, whether it be when Mars went to shit, hey, nope, let's come down here and let's seed the planet or let's relocate or whatever. And for whatever reason, you know, we still don't recreate things like the pyramids the same way they did. So in some way that technology is lost or forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So what if the people who actually knew and harnessed and understood the technology just left? And then we were left to try to sustain it and come along with it. Like, okay, that makes sense to me. The other thing that was interesting is that we started seeing a ton of alleged UFO activity in the 50s, right when we learned how to split the atom.
They're like, oh shit, they're hitting next level.
Yep.
Like, let's keep an eye on them.
Rewind to Mars. If there was some type of a crazy weapon that literally fucked the planet, hey, nope, we're not going to let you get, we're paying attention now. You're on the map. You're not fucking this planet too. And so, again, alleged, there's been reports of every time we try to go shoot a nuke off into space to test it, UFOs will show up and they'll shoot some lasers at it and disable it and fall to the ground. We can't ever test it. Yeah, that's some of the shit that I was falling into or discovering when I was earlier in the beginning of the year. I know it's off the cuff right now, and it sounds like I could be making this shit up.
Well, do you know if they were like proven? Like if
I don't remember. I was consuming so much fucking content at the time.
Yeah,
because I was like, oh my god, and then you pull on one little string of, oh, and there's all this other shit. Oh, and there's all this too, and then I started feeling like I was going crazy because I had to stop. But
so for anybody that wants to read more in detail about the conversation that we were just having about like Egypt and how language just seemed to have developed out of nowhere, which could be true, it could be false. We just really don't know. I think just to play devil's advocate, it could be a balance of where I'm not trying to dive into this, but we're looking at things that happened, you know, like 6,000 or more years ago. And so over those grand time scales, what's 3 generations where language could have developed to us? You know, that's 60 years. And so perhaps it could seem like things came out of, like language evolved out of nowhere, but maybe it happened over a couple lifetimes.
I'm talking maybe more like written language.
Yeah, and like it's organized and all of that. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, though.
Okay,
cool. Like it could have happened over a few decades, and somebody's like, hey, there's really something to this. I'm going to spend a shit ton of time like mapping this out, and I'm going to teach people, and maybe that happens over 100 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to reference was the story of the Anunnaki, and the story, I hesitate to even call it a theory, but it kind of adds up, is that there's a planet that we know almost with certainty that is beyond our traditional solar system, meaning like Pluto or Neptune, wherever you want to call the arbitrary line. And this planet orbits like every 9,000 years or something. I don't know what the time frame is, but it orbits in an elliptical pattern. So it's not like a perfect circle like the rest of the planet's orbit, but instead it will come in real close to the sun and then orbit back out, and it goes way out into deep space and comes back in every X number of years. And on that planet are the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki take their opportunities whenever the planet does come into our solar system. And we know that there is some planet out there that's influencing all the other planets' gravity. Like the way that you can project, because you know how gravity affects objects. And so you can mathematically calculate where this planet should end up from point A to point B on its trajectory. But it ends up like wildly off. And they think that it's because of like this pull from this other planet that comes in every few years, whatever that time frame is. So anyway, the Anunnaki are theorized to have done that experiment where they like created humans out of whatever DNA or matter or substance or life they had, and they merged it with terrestrial Earth life.
Yeah, and going off of that, I can't remember the book Maxwell Egan, I think was the book that I read. Could be fiction, could be nonfiction, who fucking knows. But he talked about how that same like Anunnaki or this race, they needed gold in their atmosphere.
Yeah.
And
is this all like 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 HISH stuff?
I don't know. I think the guy was Maxwell Egan who wrote this book that I had read. Some rando dude, when I sat on a plane going somewhere, ended up talking to me about this and sharing this book. It was neat. But anyway, they needed gold. Earth had a fuck ton of it. And so they created this race of humans or whatever to mine it so that they could take it and put it into their atmosphere. But because Earth was so much closer to the sun than they normally lived, they were aging a lot quicker. So they didn't actually want to colonize here. And that would go to the why we see like Egypt and shit pop up with all of this stuff. And we're showing them how to do whatever. Excuse me. And then they just leave. Well, we're already here. And then we're kind of just left to kind of figure it out ourselves. We were here as a slave worker race. Again, as what he alleged. You know, and then it goes into like this was super wild. One of the labs or something like that, one of the main bases was called Eden. And they had this big argument on, nope, these should be dumb, mindless worker, whatever. And one of the other people, the serpent, kind of tying back to like a Bible story.
Right.
It's like, nah, they should have their own chance. And gave a version of consciousness and able to reproduce, not just out of a lab. And that's how shit kind of went, and they got mad and ended up leaving. And I'm like, huh.
And so they're like, this experiment, it's like, let's see what happens. Like, they're not going to get advanced enough to take us out in the next 1,000 years or whenever planet Nibiru comes back.
Right. And so it's just interesting to be like, let's see, there's some really, really good fantasy, man. That someone just, I don't know what catalyzed that thought process, but whatever. Or they're tapping into some version of the truth. And I don't think there's a way to know for sure. So it has to fall into that fantasy.
Yeah, I think so too. And like, the problem that I have is that this story is like so interesting and it makes sense that it's hard to deny, but there's no evidence. And I'm not saying that that's what makes it hard for me to believe in. It's just that it makes it, you can't ascertain. So nobody can confidently say, this is the path.
Right.
And I think it's just as plausible as anything else, to be quite honest.
Sure.
Like, look at the way that we've talked about Neuralink before on this podcast.
Yeah.
And Neuralink, for anybody who's just coming into this episode, go listen to the other episodes.
Shameless plug.
But no, Neuralink is something that Musk is developing, and it plugs into your brain. It literally wires into the neurons. I don't want to misquote it, but it electronically integrates into your brain directly, and it allows you, it restores vision and has the potential later on down the road to enhance cognition and thought processes, etc.
It's like the 1.0 of what Neo ends up putting in the back of his head to download shit.
There you go. So now think about that. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if we implant that into a chimpanzee and we say like, well, let's make sure this doesn't really fuck him up before we put this into a human. And maybe we don't go down that path, but we definitely have a history of testing on animals. And so think about us as the chimpanzee and the Anunnaki, and they've got whatever form of consciousness and let's just call it human intelligence that they can install. Maybe it's in the form of something like Neuralink, and they're like, well, let's just see what happens. Like, let's put it in there, and we'll be back in a few years, and we'll check them out.
Well, and if this is true, then it would make sense why you have a similar story that's pretty recognized, even if it is legendary in like the Christian creation story. Well, if we didn't have our own language and stuff figured out and full understanding of what was going on, oh yeah, and then God and the devil were arguing, oh shit. And we made our own kind of version of what we could understand of the story, and you know, we were much more primitive then to not understand a laboratory and all of these things, and it was this garden, and then we got kicked out of it. Well, of course we got kicked out of the lab because we couldn't go, they didn't want us to go upgrade ourselves any further. Again, all could be just fantastical and who knows. And I'm not trying to like shatter anybody's worldview. But to me, as I read it, I was like, this is how this comes into place. And it was just another piece of the big puzzle that seems to kind of be connecting.
Part of my insensitivity, but it seems just as likely as, you know, a Jewish zombie who's the son of God, like making the world better.
Yeah.
Like, seems just as likely when you look at it objectively.
Yeah. No, I'm with it, man. Like, it's hard to go, what if this is real? And then, you know, you look at the control aspects of it. You know, stories that get massively put out have some type of a factor. You know, what's the greater use of this? And the way a lot of major religions have been spun is a system of control. Oh, nope. We get to choose these guidelines of how to live to create a certain type of human to allow us to keep doing what we're doing, and we can pull the strings of a population. This, I don't see, and maybe someone hasn't just created it yet, but I don't see those strings that you can pull with this.
Mm-hmm. It's not telling you how you should live. It's telling you why we're here.
Exactly.
Or like how we got here.
And that's not very manipulatable.
Right.
And so it would make sense that if this is the truth, again, we've said several times, and I want to reiterate again, we don't have a way to prove this. And so we're not trying to like say this is, we're just exploring shit like we always do. But if that is the truth, it would make sense why it's not widely talked about, because there's not that manipulative string.
Interesting. I think it makes sense. Like it adds up.
Yeah.
I got a question for you.
Let's do it.
Where are the aliens at, bro?
High five me, bro. I don't know, man. If I'll be careful about this. If they are real and they do have good intentions and aren't going to try to kidnap me or do some crazy shit to me, they are welcome to come hang.
We'll kick it.
Yeah.
Dude, we got some spiked hot chocolate. What more could they want?
Who knows, man? Teach me about Romulan ale or whatever the real version is that aliens or extraterrestrials use to relax after a long day of whatever the fuck it is they do.
Yeah. They're going to be like Beyonce and upgrade you.
Well, even think about that. Like, if they are real, we have a concept of time in days based on when the sun sets and falls. Well, you get out into space, and what if you're like now living in space? How do you measure time? Because you're not tied to a specific planet based on the rising and setting of a sun is how we base time. Or at least how we originally based time, and now we go from that.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, time itself is actually a little more scientific than whether the sun rises and falls.
But how do you base it?
But
You know
I
what I
know
mean?
what
How do you quantify it?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Or, you know what I mean? Like, what is their... I'm getting off on a weird tangent.
Well,
but...
bro, while we're here, this is a cliff that we're about to fall off of. So we should probably wrap this up soon. But
that's good.
You know, time is relative depending on how fast you're traveling. Do you understand that concept?
Yeah.
So the closer you get to the speed of light, the more time stands still. At the speed of light, time is stationary. Time doesn't change. So if you... I'm not explaining it to you because you acknowledge that you understood. But for anybody listening, if you're able to travel at the speed of light, let's say you are a photon and you're coming from Neptune to Earth and it takes 90 minutes or whatever, I don't know. And to you, 0 seconds elapsed. It was literally point A to point B, and in terms of time, you might as well have teleported. But relative to humans or anybody on Neptune, relative to everybody who's not traveling at the speed of light, it was 90 minutes. And ain't that some shit? So and it's been not only theoretically proven by the math behind it, but also proven by atomic clocks that were synchronized on Earth, and one went up into space where you're traveling 17,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And remember, atomic clocks are just immaculately precise. And when the clock returned, they were off by like seconds, multiple seconds. And it's like, yep, there it is. One was moving at 17,000 miles an hour to stay in Earth's orbit, and the other one was moving at relative 0 miles per hour, even though it's also moving at however many thousands of miles an hour the Earth is moving. But it's all about relativity.
Right. That's fucking weird, bro. Because then you think about, I'm sure it's much more advanced than that, but I'm out in space traveling to a different planet, and I want to shoot you a text about some cool organism we should talk about on our next podcast. Does it actually show up right away? Does it, you know what I mean? Like that disconnect of how do you communicate once you start interstellar traveling, and then that distance or that time lag, and
Yeah.
my head hurts.
Like, I think it takes like 8 minutes for messages from Mars to reach Earth. And so that's something that NASA's got to figure out. I say NASA as if the U.S. is going to be the first there. Maybe they are.
Right.
But I bet it's Elon.
No doubt. Yeah, that's a smart dude. Yeah, we could ramble about anything for forever, but I feel like we've explored extraterrestrials and 1,000 different potentials of how they could be or whatever. I think it's probably a good place to wrap this, huh?
I think so too. We're just striving to move at the speed of light so everything stays the fuck still.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Let us know what other topics you want us to cover, and we will catch you next week.